At 8:42 a.m. on November 30th, while much of Britain was still stirring beneath a pale winter sky, a single sentence from Kensington Palace sent a jolt through the country. Prince William has finalized his position regarding the Duchess of Sussex. No details, no softening language, just a cold, undeniable signal that something irreversible had occurred. The announcement hit the airwaves before sunrise, but what made it truly stunning wasn't the timing. It was the tone. Royal statements usually come wrapped in diplomacy, careful phrasing, and a glimmer of optimism. But this one had none of that. It was sharp, clinical, and heavy, suggesting the decision behind it had been fiercely debated, resisted, and, ultimately, forced into the light. Across the UK, commuters slowed their steps as the breaking banner scrolled across their phone screens. A delivery driver in Birmingham muttered, "This is serious." Meanwhile, in Glasgow, a woman waiting for the bus whispered, "Something must have gone terribly wrong." Right, came the quiet agreement. At the same moment, on the east coast of the United States, just past midnight, anchors on CNN stared wide-eyed into the camera, repeating the words, "Prince William has made a tragic announcement about Meghan, and it's worse than expected." The reaction was swift, with one truth quickly becoming apparent to everyone. This was not just another chapter in the ongoing saga of royal tension. William, by nature, does not speak unless the matter touches the very stability of the crown. For him to make any statement at all, and in such stark terms, meant that weeks, if not months, of internal pressure had finally reached a breaking point. Behind that pressure stood three powerful forces. Princess Anne, whose unshakable loyalty to duty had been her lifelong creed. Queen Camilla, surprisingly aligned with William as concerns over the monarchy's public image grew. And King Charles, torn between love for his son and the growing fear that the institution could no longer withstand another media storm. What happened behind those palace walls in the final days of November? What drove William to a decision so painful, so public, and so irreversible? To understand how everything unraveled by November 30th, we must return to the quiet, uneasy weeks that preceded it. In the time leading up to that decisive moment, small shifts within the royal household went largely unnoticed. William, a man who rarely acts without careful deliberation, found himself carrying a burden far heavier than duty alone. Throughout early November, King Charles had been under increasing strain, with palace staff quietly adjusting his schedule, citing the need to reduce unnecessary stress. This placed more responsibility on William, who was already juggling state duties, family life, and mounting tensions within the monarchy. At first, he believed the turbulence was merely temporary. He assumed that the usual winter calm would settle things, as it had in years past. But this time felt different. For months, a subtle but unmistakable pattern had emerged. American media outlets began circulating dramatic stories about Meghan's desire to reclaim her role and prepare for a new public reinvention. Meanwhile, British commentators were becoming increasingly frustrated with what they saw as endless Sussex turmoil, overshadowing the Crown's priorities. The divergence between the two countries' interpretations of the situation created a kind of narrative vacuum, one that Meghan's team seemed eager to fill. Inside Kensington Palace, William received multiple briefings highlighting this troubling trend. Anonymous sources were feeding US talk shows and digital platforms with new angles on Catherine, the royal family, and Meghan's past grievances. Most of these reports were exaggerated, some even outright false, but they were strategically timed to coincide with major royal engagements, a pattern that hadn't gone unnoticed. Then, by late November, the government began to weigh in. The Foreign Office discreetly warned the palace that the renewed transatlantic drama was complicating diplomatic relations. A senior minister sent a private note, emphasizing the need for internal consolidation of messaging. The meaning was clear. The Crown needed to regain control of the narrative before it spilled over into international relations. Amidst all of this, two figures observed the situation with growing concern. Princess Anne, who saw the chaos as a violation of the discipline she had devoted her life to maintaining, and Queen Camilla, who feared the ongoing conflict could destabilize Charles at a particularly vulnerable time. For different reasons, both women reached the same conclusion. William had to act. By the final week of November, the tension could no longer be ignored. Staff, advisors, and even Catherine herself could feel it. As the winter closed in, William understood that silence could no longer protect the crown or his family. The first unmistakable sign that the situation had crossed a dangerous line didn't come from a headline or a leak. It came from a late evening briefing Princess Anne received inside the Frogmore Library, a place typically reserved for reviewing sensitive documents. That night, the room felt colder than usual, the kind of winter chill that seeps into the walls, making every word feel heavier. Anne, whose lifelong training had made her hypersensitive to even the faintest shifts within the monarchy, studied a stack of reports before her. At the top was a summary prepared by the Royal Communications Monitoring Unit. It detailed a pattern emerging across several US-based media platforms. Coordinated talking points suggesting Meghan was preparing for a major humanitarian relaunch, with subtle insinuations that the royal family was holding her back. Nothing was directly attributed to Meghan, but the language was unmistakably aligned with her previous media strategies. Anne didn't jump to conclusions, as she never did, but she knew when a narrative was being manufactured. The next day, William received a confidential digital packet through the palace's secure network. It contained screenshots, timestamps, and analysis showing that several American podcasts and late-night shows had begun referencing Buckingham Palace sources that didn't exist. Some claims were harmless. Others, however, suggested tension between Catherine and senior staff. One segment even implied Catherine had caused an internal rift that William was secretly frustrated with. William stared at the screen for a long while, his hands tightening, though his face remained composed. "He won't say it," a staffer whispered outside his office. "But this is the first time I've seen him look tired." The next blow came in the form of the winter briefing document, a spark neither William nor Anne could ignore. The document had surfaced unexpectedly, passed anonymously to a mid-level aide who immediately recognized its sensitivity. It outlined a proposed year-end media campaign designed to redefine Meghan's royal history, framing her as a misunderstood figure whose attempts to modernize the monarchy had been stifled by institutional rigidity. It was written in polished American PR style, complete with distribution plans for TV interviews, op-eds, and a year-end documentary pitch. What troubled William wasn't the content, but the timing. The campaign was set to launch during Christmas week, the most symbolically important time of year for the monarchy, when tradition mattered more than controversy. Princess Anne reviewed the document later that afternoon. When she reached the final page where a subsection suggested strategic opportunities to address the mismanagement of royal charitable initiatives, she froze. That line wasn't just a critique, it was an attack, subtle but unmistakable, aimed at Catherine. Anne, fiercely protective of Catherine, felt a coldness settle in her chest. That evening, she met William privately in the dimly lit Windsor winter corridor, where the heating was never quite enough to combat the chill. They walked slowly, speaking in hushed voices. Anne explained the implications. If Meghan's media campaign launched without response, the monarchy would be forced into yet another cycle of reactive defense. Catherine's reputation, carefully built on years of steady service, would become collateral damage. William listened, his jaw tight but his expression controlled. He didn't interrupt. When Anne finished, he exhaled deeply, the breath visible in the cold. "Who else knows?" he asked. "Camilla," Anne replied. "She reviewed the document this afternoon." William stopped walking. Camilla's involvement changed everything. For decades, Camilla had been a polarizing figure, but in recent years she had unexpectedly aligned herself with William to protect Charles's stability. She understood better than anyone how damaging uncontrolled narrative storms could be. She had lived through them. If even Camilla was alarmed, the threat was real. That night, in a quiet moment inside Clarence's house, Camilla approached William privately. Her voice was low, steady, laced with the weariness of someone who had survived her own media battles. "It's starting again," she said. "Different faces, same tactics, and your father cannot endure another season like this." It was the first time Camilla had openly urged William toward decisive action. The final confirmation that something had gone irreparably wrong came from the Foreign Office. An encrypted message arrived for William, stating that escalating US media narratives were beginning to complicate diplomatic communications. It was phrased delicately, but the meaning was unmistakable. The monarchy's internal conflict was spilling over into international relations. By the time November 30th arrived, the signs were glaring. And for William, guardian of the crown's future, son of a worried king, and husband to a woman now caught in the storm, it was clear. Silence could no longer shield them. A decision had to be made. The tension that had been building throughout November finally shattered inside the 1844 room at Buckingham Palace. A room steeped in history, rarely used for family reckonings. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the tall windows, rattling the frames with a steady rhythm. Inside, the air felt even colder. William sat at the head of the long table, a stack of documents in front of him. Reports from the Royal Communications Monitoring Unit, excerpts from U.S. late-night shows, analysis of anonymous sources, and most critically, the winter briefing document outlining Meghan's year-end media plan. To his left, Princess Anne sat, arms crossed, her expression composed but resolute. On his right, Queen Camilla's hands were clasped, her face a portrait of firmness, surprising even the senior staff. When the private secretary closed the door, William spoke first. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice firm, "I want it understood that what happens in this room concerns the stability of the crown, not personal grievances." There was no disagreement, just a quiet, shared acknowledgement that the situation had moved far beyond personal feelings. Anne slid the annotated copy of the briefing document across the table. "This," she said sharply, "is an orchestrated attempt to relaunch a narrative that undermines our work. And more importantly, Catherine's reputation." Camilla nodded, her voice low but unwavering. "Your father cannot carry another season of public turmoil. He barely settled after the last cycle. If this media campaign goes ahead at Christmas, it will be Charles who suffers first." William sifted through the papers again, not because he needed to review them, but because he needed a moment to steady himself under the weight of his decision. He had known for weeks that the situation was deteriorating, but hearing Anne and Camilla speak with such total alignment gave him clarity he had not expected. The private secretary began presenting the findings from the communications unit. The room fell silent as he read. Multiple American outlets have received identical talking points from 3 separate accounts linked to a PR agency with previous ties to the Duchess. Anne's eyes narrowed. William's shoulders tightened, though his face remained impassive. The secretary continued, "There are also indirect attacks aimed at the Princess of Wales, suggestions of internal conflict, emotional instability, and charitable mismanagement. None of these claims have any basis, but the pattern is coordinated." Camilla's breath hitched. "This is reckless," she said. "Not only for Catherine, but for the monarchy as a whole." The most unsettling part came at the end. If launched fully, the media campaign would dominate public conversation through the holidays, overshadowing royal engagements and destabilizing public confidence. The words destabilizing public confidence carried a weight no royal could ignore. The conversation turned heavier as advisors outlined the international complications that were already emerging. Foreign partners had begun asking whether the crown intended to address the Sussex-related instability, a humiliation the palace had hoped to avoid. When the advisors finished, Anne leaned forward. "William, you know what must be done. If Meghan is preparing a media offensive that targets your wife, threatens the monarchy's cohesion, and risks your father's health, you cannot let this continue." William didn't look at the papers anymore. The truth had already settled deep inside him. The crown could not endure another Sussex cycle, not with Charles's health in a fragile state, not with strained diplomatic relations, and certainly not when the monarchy was trying to modernize under increasing scrutiny. Then Camilla spoke the most unexpected voice of support. "You carry the future of this family," she said quietly, without her usual guardedness. "If you must draw a boundary, draw it. Charles will understand, even if it pains him." It was the first time she had ever openly urged William to take decisive action. The room fell silent, the only sound the distant wind that howled softly along the palace stone. William finally lifted his gaze. "I will act," he said, "but this decision must be final. No half measures, no ambiguities." Staff began drafting potential statements immediately, testing language that balanced firmness with dignity. William rejected drafts that were either too harsh or too vague. He didn't want sensationalism, he wanted clarity. By late evening, the final statement was nearly complete. The plan was simple. At 6:47 a.m. on November 30th, Kensington Palace would release a message confirming William's position on Meghan, ending the uncertainty that had consumed the crown for months. As staff dispersed, William stood alone in the dim light of the 1844 room. He knew that in just a few hours, every newspaper from London to Los Angeles would dissect his words. But he also knew he had no choice. The monarchy could not move into December with unresolved fractures. The winter morning arrived with a brittle stillness, the kind that settles just before something breaks. Frost clung to the stone pillars outside Kensington Palace, thin as glass, fragile as the moment. Inside, behind the heavy curtains of his private study, William stood alone, reviewing the final draft of the announcement he had spent the last 12 hours perfecting. He had made the decision the night before in the 1844 room. but its weight didn't truly settle until this moment. In the pre-dawn quiet, he felt the enormity of what he was about to do, publicly drawing the firmest line the monarchy had taken against Meghan since their departure in 2020. Not with anger, but with devastating clarity.